y'all are here, and we'll try and get going here on this. My part on the program, it basically is the most exciting part of the deal. It is the paperwork part. So you can all appreciate that, I'm sure. We want to talk to you about writing the plan itself and the details that go into it. First thing, you want to make sure that in your plan that you do the preparation activities, you outline what all those are. And this could be anything from preparing your fire breaks to the interior work that you want to do. If you got a lot of cedars out there and you want to get rid of those cedars, those types of things, all that work needs to be outlined in your burn plan. Again, so that you have that log of what you need to do and make sure it's done. It'll outline the activities of the fire boss and the crew and set the prescription for the weather range. And David did a lot of talking about the weather and how important that is. So you do need to set those ranges of what will work for your particular burn. You need to meet those legal requirements. And again, this gets back to that doing due diligence. You know, the plan you have in your head doesn't mean anything if you get into litigation. When you go to a court of law, those lawyers are going to ask you, where's your plan? And if you point to your head, you're done. It's not going to happen. They're not going to allow that. That's got to be written down. So that is an important part of the overall reason. Probably the most utilitarian part of the burn plan is the burn map itself. This is a document that you're going to be using to communicate to your crew and your neighbors that are going to help you with that. And on that map, you're going to outline the burn unit. You're going to inventory the unit to make sure that you have everything identified that's pertinent to the actual fire behavior and access of your crew, and identify all the routes in and out, the trails, the roads, the gates, the crossings, etc. Identify any hazards that you have out there. You'll have a legend on there that should identify any icons or features that you've put on your map, and you'll identify all your fire breaks. Identify your ignition points, and we'll talk about those ignition points here in a little bit. Okay, this is going to be our example we use. This is our burn map that we're going to start with. And you can go to the NRCS, you can go to FSA, you can go to Google Earth, and pull up a map and print it off. And I'm going to use computer-generated information to put on there, but you can do the same thing with a box of crayons or a box of felt tip pens. It doesn't make any difference how you write on your map, but it's important to get it on there so you have it as a reference. In this particular case, you will see that we do have roads around three different sides of our burn unit. This particular unit is in a very native grass area, a broad expanse of native grass. And these are very rural roads with very little traffic on it. As David said earlier, there probably isn't 2 cars a day that go up and down those roads. But it is important to note that once you do light that fire, the traffic will pick up immensely. First thing we're going to do is inventory our property, and the red line up there that goes around 3 sides of it, that's actually a power line. That's a distribution line for people in the community. It's not a high-end line, transmission line. I will make a comment about those transmission lines on that wire-to-ground discharge. In my career, I've seen that twice. One was probably 30 years ago when I lived in Council Grove. I was helping some people burn, and we caught a pile of railroad ties on fire that happened to be underneath a transmission line. and that one did arc. We were about 3/8 of a mile away. Not a big deal. You heard the boom, and not a big deal. A year ago, I was helping some folks burn, and we'd cleared a lot of cedars, had a lot of brush piles, and there was one area where there was a group of cedars around a wet area where they couldn't get in and cut them. And we lit this up, and I happened to be probably 100 yards or a little better from this particular area. And I actually took pictures of these cedar trees going up, and they kick off, cedar trees kick off a pretty good column of black smoke. And we had a south wind. These happened to be on the south side of that transmission line, and it bent that column of smoke over into that transmission line. 100 yards was not enough space, believe me, when that let go. She got your attention real quick. The only thing I really regret was I didn't have it on video so I could show people, but it is impressive when that happens. So be aware. These lines don't necessarily discharge as bad. I have never seen it happen, but you do need to have it on there as a hazard. And again, keep your crew out of the smoke as much as you can. The other things you want to identify, like the rough area, up there we got the residents identified, we got a rough area there. That becomes important as we lay out our fire breaks. We got a canyon area up here that we cannot cross, too steep, too rugged. The little white marks on there are basically the gates where you can get in. You got to mark your egress. Also, we have a wooden bridge down here. That's important to identify those structures. Again, you know, we talked about the power poles. The county also frowns on you guys burning up wooden bridges. So keep that in mind, identify those things. I do like to, a lot of times, put in structures that are obvious. In this case, I've got an abandoned windmill here. And the reason I like to do that is because that's a focal point or a reference that people can use, understand. You got neighbors out there that are helping you that may have never been on this particular property. So they can say, hey, I got a problem and we're just west of the old windmill. So you got a reference point there. Let's see what else we got. We got the pins identified down in the corner. And we also go around the outside of our burn area and look at what's on the outside of your burn, because again, if it escapes, you're going to have to deal with it. In this case, we got native grass down here and it's pretty short. This is pretty heavily grazed down in here. Over here, we just got a standard pasture with native grass. Up here, we have heavy native grass. In other words, there's a lot of fuel up in this particular area. Same way on the west side, we just have native grass pasture is pretty standard. So once you got all that, the next thing you want to do is look to see where you're going to put in your fire breaks, and basically that's what the yellow line is. In this particular case, I like to use county roads as fire breaks. You got bare mineral soil. You can light in the road ditch and it'll burn up to the road and it'll burn up to the fence at a relatively slow pace, and you can get it blackened out pretty easily. In this case up on the north end, we don't have any road up here, so we're going to use a mowed line across the top and around the residence. And again, as David mentioned before, the standard that we use is 10 foot of width for every height of fuel. If you actually look at the standard, it says the minimum is 20 feet. That's not nearly enough. You ought to have a minimum of 30 feet. And the reason being is it's just too hot, particularly when you're locked in against a fence that you can't get away from it. If you don't care about the paint on your pickup, that's okay. I guess you can sit in there and be okay, but it'll blister the paint on the pickup pretty easy if you get less than that 30 feet. Other options for fire breaks, of course, you can till a fire break. I'm not a fan of tilled fire breaks on native rangeland simply from an erosion standpoint and the destruction that takes place as soil, topsoil layer. So try and stay away from that. One of the things I forgot to point out is my deer stand up here in the country that I work in a lot. We have a lot of deer hunters. You need to point that out as a hazard, not necessarily a hazard in terms of the fire, but those things are, particularly the newer ones, are poly or some type of plastic. They do melt in prescribed fires, and they are kind of expensive. So you either got to secure it by mowing around it, or you got to remove it, one or the other.
So do you mow it the fall before the spring burn? Or?
Okay, oh, good question. That's actually a pretty good question. If you're going to burn in the spring, you can start preparing your mowed fire breaks anytime after the first killing frost. And the earlier you get started, the better. Simply because you got the mulch layer that you're going to put down, you got that time then for that to decay. And you want to get rid of as much of that mulch, and David talked about mulch there this morning. You want to get rid of as much of that as you possibly can. So, yep, no problem. Okay, the next thing we're going to look at is what wind direction we're going to use. And in my case, with this particular burn plan, you kind of look at it. If you use a east wind, you're going to push the fire into the residence, and you don't want to do that if you can help it. If you use a west wind, you got a canyon up here that becomes a problem to get across. So when you're doing your flank fires, it becomes an issue that you have to deal with. Okay, and you also you have that heavy fuel on the north end there. Probably in this case, in my opinion, the best option would be to use a north wind and push your fire into your road down here. One, if it does jump, you have short grass over here, you have the opportunity to run it down a little quicker, a little easier. Okay, also, I always try and select the best fire break to push my fire into. It's the one that's going to be the hardest to hold, but if you use your best one, it might take the least effort that way. So try and push your fire into your best fire break if at all possible. The other thing, once you've kind of decided where your wind direction is, you want to look downwind before you really lock into it. Make sure there's not residences down there. Make sure you don't have any sensitive smoke areas down there. In our case, in this particular case, and we'll show it a little bit later, but we don't have a lot of downwind issues. But it's surprising how many little airports, those types of things that pop up out in the communities that you need to be aware of. You certainly don't want to put smoke columns up in any of the flight lines that they have for their airports. So, next thing I like to do is my backfire. I put my backfire in, and again, you can just draw this in on your map using color crayons or felt markers. And there's no color scheme here. I just happen to use green for my backfire. And I drop these pins down there, and those are the ignition points that I talk about. Something's going to happen at each one of these points as the fire develops. But again, I talked about that wooden bridge being right here. That's where I'm going to start my fire. And again, the reason being is the county frowns on you burning those things up. I want all my resources right there when I start my fire so I can protect that bridge. In our situation, we use mostly circle burns. In other words, we have two teams going each direction, and we go around it and circumnavigate the burn. In this particular case, we do have a wet draw that runs up away from that bridge. As I put my backfire in, what's going to happen is we're going to have to widen this thing out to make it blacker, wider. And we're going to do that by doing strips across there. If you have a wet draw right there above that bridge and you have 2 teams, your ignition people can work on either side of that wet area and they don't have to cross it. And again, you got to take those things into account, your accessibility and how you can get around that, circumnavigate that burn with the least amount of confusion and the least amount of effort to dodge those kinds of things. The next point I'd like to make is on these corners, we'll hold up here, and that's why those pins are there. We'll hold up the teams here until we do get that wide enough to take our head fire when it does come. Normally what I like to do in spring burns, I want a minimum of 100 foot wide of black line before I move up my sides. And that it depends a little bit on what you have up here in terms of fuel load, but a minimum of 100 foot wide. Growing season burns, I might narrow that up a little bit to 50 feet or 75 feet, again, depending on what you have for fuel load upwind from that. Okay, the next issue we'll deal with is our flank fires, and again, I show those in blue coming up the sides. We try and move those 2 teams up, trying to keep them relatively equal. In case you have a wind shift from one way or the other, you're not going to be sending head fire into the other team. So we try and move them up and make sure that they're equal. Again, we're going to hold this east team up. We're going to hold them up right up here while this west team works its way around the residence there. And again, when you have high priority or high value structures involved, you certainly want to spend a lot of time blackening that out and make sure you have a good black area around there. Again, I would strip that out if, depending a little bit on wind, I would strip it out or I'd let it develop under its own initiative, depending, again, on wind, just to make sure it's at least 100 feet wide before I start on my head fire. Once I have all my processes in place here, then I'd go ahead and put in my head fire and run it across the top. And this pin right here is where we're going to end our burn. We're going to join up right there. And again, remember I talked about the canyon you can't cross? Well, we'll bring it in from both sides. We'll run our trucks up there and we'll run out hoses, or we'll have backpack sprayers or whatever to contain that canyon area while we burn it out. But the point being is that if you do have obstructions where you cannot circumnavigate the entire circumference of the burn, there are ways to work around that. You can do the same thing on the ignition side. If we didn't have a road here, we certainly could have done a mowed line and do wet line, lay down a wet line, but we could have started on that creek at the same place and just worked both ways without anybody ever having to cross it. So there are options as to how you can get around that burn. Okay, some of the last things I would do with my burn plan map is I'm going to locate my auxiliary water. And basically, in our case, we use tenders, 1,000-gallon tenders, 1,500-gallon tenders. We're also in an agricultural area where they do a lot of spraying. So there are a lot of those bulk transport water tanks available. I would put one at the residence simply because it's high value, high property value. Also, I'd put one over on the other side because this going across here, the mowed line, that we're going to use a wet line in that case, that's where we're going to use the most water. So we want to get your auxiliary water as close to where you're going to be using it. If I was to use a wet line on the south end instead of the road, I would place my tankers or my tenders on each end of that, simply again because that's where you're going to use the most water. I would set them outside of my burn because you want to get them out of the smoke. There's a lot of congestion as far as traffic around those things. You got people running in with trucks, loading them up. You got people with hoses trying to fill them up and stuff. So you want to get them out of the smoke where everything's pretty visible. and also just from a, from a personal standpoint, people standpoint, you don't have to work in the smoke that way. So the last thing I would do, I would number or letter my ignition points around the burn. And in my case, I always number the right-hand side with letters. I use alphabetic on the right-hand side, and then I use numbers on the left-hand side. Keep in mind we're using 2 teams, and we're using 2-way radios all the time. So if somebody says, "Hey, I got a problem at point B," I know that's on the east side. I know it's on, I know where that letter or number is. Same way on the west side. If somebody says I have a problem at point 3, then I already know it's on the west side. I don't have to set about, well, where's that number at? You already got it cut in half and located somewhat. Okay, here's just an example of a producer made burn plan map. He does have his water identified, auxiliary water. He has a little legend up here. He's identified all of his gates so we can get in. We've got his north arrow on there. Again, he just printed off a map off of Google Earth and used felt markers to mark it up, and it's perfectly adequate. If you have any kind of computer skills, there's a number of programs that can help you draw up a map with a lot more information, and maybe it looks neater, but it's still, as long as it's legible and can communicate to your crew, there's not a problem with it. Okay, we handed this out to you. If you're writing your own burn plan, a lot of this stuff seems kind of irrelevant, if you will. But again, you're not necessarily writing your own burn plan for yourself. You're writing it for other circumstances, whether you're participating in a government program or you're protecting yourself from litigation. Make sure you fill out all the blanks that you can with the pertinent information, name, address, phone number, county, that type of thing. All that is important from the person outside looking at your burn plan. Description of the pasture name, you can certainly put something in there. Probably the more important part of this section is that vegetation present. They want to know, are we just burning grass, or we got heavy fuels out there? Do we have standing cedar trees, or do we have down fuels, that type of thing? Acreage is important simply because of the size of the burn that we're looking at. Legal description, we want to know where it's at. Directions from the nearest town, and this is one of those things that makes you think a little bit. This is basically in there from a 911 standpoint, so you don't have to think about, okay, he's got to go up to this corner, and he's got to go south on Plum, and he's got to go north, that type of thing. You already have it thought out and you have it written down. And that's one of the points I want to make about doing a burn plan. The burn plan, the document itself is pretty important. Probably the most important part is the process. This process makes you think about things that you may not think about if you're not writing stuff down and not filling out a template or have some guidance there. The planning process, the what ifs, how do I address these issues? How do I address these problems? That process is probably the most important part of the plan itself, is to go through that. Okay, the range of burn dates. When do you plan on carrying this out? Is it going to be a growing season burn, or is it going to be a spring burn? And again, when it actually happens, you want to document that. Objectives, again, David did a good job of going over the objectives this morning, but you certainly want to write that down and have it included in your burn plan. Notifications, fire department, this is just prior to the burn, but you want to have those numbers handy, and adjoining landowners. And again, David made this point this morning. It's extremely important that you start talking to your neighbors earlier. months in advance of your burn. They may have property they want to burn next to you. They may have a good lease road or a pasture road that you can use as a fire break. And it does disgust me quite a little bit when you burn something and you've struggled to keep it on the property line, and a week later the neighbor comes and burns right up to your burn. That just makes you just feel let down, I guess, from any other way to describe it. But certainly you need to make sure your neighbors are involved and talk to them during this planning process. Pre-burn preparations, and again, this is extremely important that you identify those things to make sure you carry them out. And this would include, like I said, cutting cedars out in the burn. In our case, we do a lot of what we call cut and stuff. I don't know if you guys ever heard that phrase before, but we cut a lot of cedars and we shove them off into canyons where we can't cut cedars. And basically what we're doing there is just building up the fuel load so that we can burn those out. Now, you got to be real careful with that type of technique. You certainly don't want to cut and stuff anything that's within 500 feet of your border. You want to keep it on very much on the interior. But we do have a lot of canyons that just you can't ride a horse into, you can't get into with a skid steer or any type of equipment. So we do a lot of cut and stuff. Make sure you have good mowed lines, and here you document whether you're going to have mowed lines or your county roads. In our case, on county roads, we certainly recommend that they mow those road ditches ahead of time as much as practical, and in some cases it's not practical to mow them, but make sure we take care of that. Interior fences, if you have interior fences, here again, as part of your prep work, you might want to mow on both sides of your fences just to keep the heat down on your wires. It's not going to do anything for the wooden post, but it will help you with the wire issue. Your fire break types, again, the locations, roads, mowed lines. Fuel conditions, try and identify those, whether you have heavy fuels or light fuels, and also the continuity of it. And again, David did a good job of explaining how burns will not necessarily get all the pasture where they've heavily grazed parts of it. Your weather conditions, and again, this is your prescription, and this is basically kind of the heart of whether you burn or you don't burn, is that weather conditions. On temperatures, on the planning process, I like to keep my temperature in between. For spring burns, I like to stay in between 40 degrees and about 85 degrees, 80 to 85. You don't want to go below 40 degrees as a general rule, simply because you're going to end up with freezing problems. You might not think water will freeze at 38 degrees, but if you're going down the road and you got to drive 20 miles or 10 miles to get to your burn, that cold air circulating around those hoses and tanks and pumps, that will freeze. So you don't want to go to a burn and have it froze up. On the high side of that 80 to 85 degrees, that becomes a fuel issue and the volatility, and also it's a people issue as well. On summer burns, growing season burns, we like to keep that temperature in that 70 to 100 degree range. And when I talk about 100 degrees, I mean the feel-like temperature. Maybe the ambient temperature may be lower than that, but if it feels like 100 degrees, you don't want to be burning above that, and that's a people issue. It's hot out there, and you're going to have heat strokes, you're going to have stress. Old men like me with heart issues, that's going to take a toll on them. So, on relative humidity, generally on that side, from my backfire side, I want to keep that relative humidity in between that 30 and 70% range. I don't like to go below 30% relative humidity when I'm setting the backfire, simply because You're usually setting your backfire at the beginning of the day, in the morning or maybe in midday. And as the day goes on, what happens to the humidity? It goes down. So you certainly don't want to be starting your backfire at 25% relative humidity, because by the time you get done, you're going to be below 20. On the high side, 70% relative humidity, you get anywhere above that, and it's just darn hard to light a fire in grass. It just won't take for you. So, wind direction, again, that's kind of dictated by your circumstances. You certainly want to, like I say, blow your fire into your best fire break, and also take into consideration your downstream smoke. On wind speed, what I like to do there, again, as David explained, you want to have wind, so you want to keep it above 5 miles an hour if you can, simply because that gives you maybe a little more continuity as to direction. If I'm working with people that are relatively new to burning, I will specify that they stay below 15 miles an hour, and again, that's a control issue, and if they don't have any experience there, you need to have something that you can work with and contain. If I'm working with a burn association or people that have had a lot of experience with burning, I will jack that up to 20 miles an hour. You get much above 20 miles an hour and the control becomes a real question at times. So 20 is the top. As long as I mentioned the burn associations, I will talk about those a little bit. Burn associations basically are neighbors helping neighbors. They are formal groups. They do have structure. They have a board of directors. They have officers. They collect dues, those types of things, but they are community organizations. We have about 16 in Kansas. The farthest one east we have is Miami County, and the farthest one west we have is in Kearney County. And all the other ones are basically lined up on the west side of the Flint Hills. We don't have any in the Flint Hills, but most of them are basically up and down the west side of the Flint Hills. Basically what happens with a burn associations, people get together and they bring their equipment, they bring their experience, and they help each other do burns. You don't have to help with every burn. Most of the burn associations do have a requirement that before we'll burn your property, you have to come and help us burn at 2 or 3. Each association's a little different, but they'll require that you help somebody else before we help you, kind of a thing. And that gets away from that one and done type deal. You know, if you have a association, everybody wants to come in and help. If you come and help me burn mine and you get yours burned, well, I'm too busy. I got things to do. Yes, ma'am.
Is there a website that lists the ones here in Kansas?
Yes, it's on the KGLC.org website, I believe. You can go in there and it says prescribed fire, and you can get into that section of the group. And the closest one here would be, it'd be the Smoky Hill one, wouldn't it? Yeah, Smoky Hill. Yeah. So again, if you have any questions about that, I'd certainly be willing to answer those. Our smoke management, make sure that you've identified all your sensitive areas. Generally, we're looking at roads. Again, I like to use county roads as fire breaks. A lot of times we'll put up signs. A lot of times we'll block them off with somebody. Not that we'll make them impassable, but we will set somebody on each end of the road where it is being smoked out, and we'll have two-way communications where we talk back and forth, and we'll notify the other end when a vehicle is coming through, so we don't get two vehicles in there at the same time so they run into each other. But here, if you go to that website that David showed you this morning, this is the type of map you can generate from that. This is actually the little burn unit that I showed you there on the aerial photograph. Again, this thing is about 6/10 of a mile wide, and as David pointed out, if you just go down 1.5 times that, you'd be down here about a mile and 8/10. So this is our area of concern that we'd want to look at. We'd want to check to see if there's any residents in there, if we have any airports or anything like that. In this particular case, that little dark spot right there, that's actually a little lake that has a lot of cabins around it. It's outside of our area of concern, or immediate concern, I guess. But in this case, I would go ahead and contact that homeowners association and let them know, hey, we plan to put some smoke on you, and this is when we plan to do it. Simply cut down on the number of 911 calls, because that's the type of deal where if you put smoke on a group of people like that, somebody's going to get nervous and they're going to call in and try and dispatch fire units out there. But okay, here's a pre-checklist that we want to see you go through, and again, it's on that form. Brush piles, we want all those at least 300 feet inside of the burn unit at best. If you can't do that, then you need to burn your brush piles out before you burn your unit out. And our recommendation on that is you try and burn during the months of May and June. You know, a lot of people like to burn when there's snow on the ground. And in Kansas, that's a real no, basically. Because what happens is if you burn that brush pile with snow on the ground in Kansas, invariably, we get 2 days later, we get a nice hot day, snow's gone. The following day, we get a high wind, and you got embers scattered all over the place. If you or remember, we had a fire down at Hutchinson 2 years ago. Yeah. And it was called Cottonwood Complex Fire. That particular fire was started by brush piles that were burnt in the snow. Snow melted off, wind came up, started that particular fire. They burned up 35 houses. They burned up, I believe it was 110 outbuildings, 92 vehicles, and there was 1 fatality. So it's serious, folks. Keep in mind that fire is serious. Pens and barns, make sure those are secure. As David mentioned this morning, wooden pens are certainly susceptible if you have fuel leading up to them. In our little example there, we did have a set of pens down in the corner. A lot of times pens are pretty heavily trafficked by livestock, so a lot of times you don't have an issue if you don't have fuel there, but you can if you don't use them that often. Oil and gas, David covered that pretty good. You want to certainly notify the oil and gas companies if they have leases out there and they have vulnerable equipment. It is their responsibility to take care of that. It's not necessarily in Kansas, it's not your responsibility to take care of that, but it's certainly a good idea to notify them that you plan on burning, to give them the opportunity. And again, this is one of those advanced things. You don't want to call them the day before. You want to call them ahead of time. Hey, we're planning to burn this pasture this spring. You know, keep that in mind as your guys go out there and work on the units, that they need to clean those up. Fences, again, I mentioned the interior part. Make sure that your fences are protected as best you can. Homes and, whoops, hit the wrong button. Homes and cabins. In the part of the world I work in, we have a lot of deer hunters that have cabins out there, and we do try and let them know about it. We will go in and mow around them. We have gone in and black-lined around them, and basically what I'm saying there is we burn around them. And a lot of times we'll even, the day of the burn, we'll go in and set a unit there just to protect that cabin. David showed you the water windmills, solar panels. They are very susceptible. quite frankly, I've never seen a solar panel itself harmed by a fire, but the wiring to them is real sensitive, and it does clean those wires up really nice. So keep that in mind. And the thing about solar panels is when we put those in, we put the solar panel in, and the next thing we do, we put a fence around it to protect it. And the next thing that happens, you get all that vegetation in there, so you got a real hot spot right under that solar panel. So keep that in mind, make sure it's cleaned out so you don't have those issues. Feeding facilities, any old tires, if you're using truck tires as some type of or tractor tires as some type of a feed bunk, make sure all those rubber things are either removed or protected. And again, David mentioned that equipment deal. It's amazing how many times you go out in these pastures and you find old farm equipment that they left abandoned from years ago. Understand the people that you're having help you have probably never been on this property. And so they may not know that old disc is out there, and you may run astride of that pretty easy. Okay, this is just a log that you can use to document what happens the day of the burn. Generally, the first column is what the conditions were when you started the fire, and then about a third or three-fourths of the way, or third or fourth of the way through the burn, you'd like to document again. I like to do that right after we get our backfire set and it's widened out. I like to document it, time and temperature there. And then when you get up and get ready to light your head fire, I like to document that as well. And then I finish it off by documenting the end of the fire so that you know what the conditions were when you completed the burn. As far as an equipment list goes, they give you a list here that you can check off to identify what you need and numbers, and also the number of people that you need. Drip torches are a must. If you're trying to use propane, don't. That's my comment on that. Don't use propane gas to light your fire. It is a gas. It has no residency time to stay there, so you want to use some type of fuel. In our case, what we use on our, as far as our mix goes, we try and use a 3-to-1 mix in the springtime, and again, it's 3 parts diesel, 1 part gas. And the reason we do that is because it has some residency time, but it's relatively volatile. It catches real easy, and your grass in the springtime is pretty dry, so you can just cook right along. During the growing season, we like to up the diesel fuel a little bit. We go to a 4-to-1 mix, 4 parts diesel, 1 part gas. The reason for that is because we want some residency time of that flame. When we drop it on the ground, we want that to burn a little longer because you have green grass you're trying to get ignited. And so you need a little more heat, a little more time there. That works pretty well. Now, I have seen people use 2 parts diesel, 1 part gas. It works, but it is a little volatile. If things get hot during the day, your drip torch will actually surge at times, and you'll get a little mini flamethrower, and that's okay if you know what you're doing, but sometimes people forget and they put fire where you don't want it to be. So watch when you start upping the gas or cutting the diesel fuel, you can have some issues there. Next thing on there is matches. In our case, when we work with burn associations, we always have the landowner or operator light the fire. Now, we'll spread the heck out of it after it's lit, but we always want them to light the fire. The reason being is because of the liability issue. When things go bad and you end up in court, one of those lawyers is going to ask you who started the fire. Okay? It needs to be the landowner or the operator because it's going to be their insurance that protects you. Invariably, when you go to do that, landowner or operator shows up and they don't have any matches or cigarette lighters. So it's.
Liability insurance should you carry in something like this?
Excuse me?
How much liability insurance should you carry as a rule of thumb?
Oh, I wouldn't have any idea, but I would certainly look at my surroundings. If I'm burning here in Manhattan and I'm looking at $1 million homes, I'd have a pretty good policy. But I can't answer that simply because there's just too many variables there. But I would, and again, before I ever started almost anything, any part of this process, I'd talk to my insurance agent. Some of the insurance policies are a little vague on whether they do or they don't cover you on prescribed fires. So I would certainly talk to my agent, and when I get a response from him, I want that response in a letter or in an email that I can save. So you got documentation that they do or they don't. And if they don't, I wouldn't burn. I mean, that's just all there is to it. You need insurance. That's the bottom line. And there are, there are agents that will try and skirt that, but I'd get it in writing, one way or the other. Okay, shovels, rakes, the flappers. We try and carry hand tools on all of our trucks. Simply because there's times that it's a lot more convenient to go ahead and use a shovel or a rake to flip cow pies or burning sticks out into the black area. You always flip things into the black, never out. Because invariably when you flip one of those out, there's a little ember on that twig or that stick that you didn't see. So always flip things in. Backpack pumps. Again, having been a wildland firefighter, I have some experience with those. Not a real fan, particularly at my age. I'm definitely not a fan. They are very valuable, however, as I pointed out on our little map there, in that canyon area that we can't cross. There's places they are needed, and that would be a good place to have one, that you can get down in there and put out some fire. Let's see, what do we got? Chainsaws, if you have any wooded areas close to your fire break, I'd certainly have a chainsaw on hand. David showed you the picture of the cottonwood tree that was on fire. You certainly want to lay those things down if you can, simply because when you have elevation and you have ember cast, that ember is going to go a lot farther when that tree is casting them off the top of it. Okay, leaf blowers. How many have ever seen a leaf blower on a fire? Pretty handy, actually. They're very handy, particularly on mopping up the edges of a flank fire, mopping up the edges on a backfire. If you can blow that back into the black, it works real good. You certainly can't use it on any kind of fire that has any intensity to it. They're just not built for that, but they certainly can clean you up on the edges. Save a lot of water. If your water is an issue, if you're limited on water, you can certainly save a lot of water with leaf blowers. Okay. On our pumps, generally we like to have our pickups need to be four-wheel drive. 3/4 ton trucks, we usually carry 200 to 250 gallons on those. If you have a ton truck, particularly if it has dual wheels on it, we'll run up to 300 gallons on those. We have basically two styles, if you will. We have what we call knockdown units. We have those on the fire. They usually pump 25 to 30 gallons a minute. That's our knockdown units. Our mop-up units, then they come along and they're usually pumping about 5 gallons a minute just to mop things up. Yes, sir?
We just got a high pressure, low volume setup. It really does a lot of good.
It certainly can, yeah.
It can.
Yeah. And again, when you get into those low volume, high pressure, low volume, you can't knock down big fires, but you certainly can, mop up edges and like with cow pies, you can zing them out in there. It works really good. Yep. We do have in some of the burn associations, and again, getting back to that segment of it, with burn associations, they have the opportunity. We have local associations, and then we have an umbrella association for the state. It's the Kansas Prescribed Burn Association, which all the chapters kind of fit under. The state association is a 501c3, has the tax exempt status, and all the local associations have access to that. What that provides is the opportunity for grants to get equipment. A lot of the foundations that are interested in promoting natural resources issues will look towards organizations that have that tax exempt status. So it does give you kind of a caveat there to get some additional funds. A lot of the associations have used that grant program to buy slip-in units, to buy additional equipment. They will have all kinds of things that the normal rancher or farmer does not have on hand. They also have the opportunity of working through the Kansas Forest Service. Kansas Forest Service has access to surplus military equipment, and when they get it, they look it over and make sure it's serviceable, and then they will donate it basically to the umbrella association, the Kansas Prescribed Burn Association, and then that that group will dole it out basically to the local chapters if they have a need for that. We've got a lot of these big, what they call M1078 Army trucks. They're basically the four-wheel drive units, snub nose. They are great in rough country. They really do a good job of helping us control our fires. They'll effectively carry up to 750 gallons of water, and they'll just crawl up about anything. You got the guts to drive it up. I mean, now side to side they're a little tippy. Up and down they're pretty good. They're really good. So. Let's see, ATVs and ATV four-wheelers, I'm a real fan of those. In our particular situation, we do a lot of large burns, the 3,000 acres. The biggest one we did this year is 7,000 acres, 18 miles of fire line. So if you're stringing fire, you're not going to walk 18 miles, in a day. I guess you could walk at 18 miles in a day, but to do a fire, you can't do it. So we do use a lot of four-wheelers to string our fire out, and we also use four-wheelers with sprayers to do a lot of mop-up and clean-up behind the units. UTVs, I'm a big fan of those. I like those a lot. Most of those will haul 60 to 75 gallons of water. They're quick, they're agile, you can move in, move out really easily. They just are almost indispensable on a fire, particularly for monitoring behind the crews that are lighting fires. They do a good job there. Again, we talked about that. Normally you can get about a mile. You can lay down about a mile of fire line with a gallon of torch fuel, but understand that there's a lot more than just laying down a single line. You got to go in and strip out a lot of these areas, so you need to kind of keep that in mind as you're supplying your burn for that day. Keep in mind that it's important to have enough torch fuel on hand. Diesel and gas are not cheap today, but in the overall process, it's a pretty cheap investment to have a little extra on hand to make sure the job gets done. Okay, pump fuel, that's kind of a no-brainer. Make sure you have gas for your pumps. 2-cycle fuel, that would be for your chainsaws and your weed blowers, leaf blowers. Weather equipment, I like to have on site a Kestrel. that measures the humidity, wind direction, wind speed are the two things that you want to document, make sure it happens according to your plan. Two-way radios, and again, this is my opinion, but they're a must. They're absolutely a must. I do not promote cell phones on prescribed fires. They're just too hard to make the job go easily. When you get in trouble and you need help, when you have your only communication is a cell phone, you're only calling one person at a time. It just takes too long to get things gathered up and get them there. If you have two-way radio communications, you can reach out to everybody and tell them you need help. Now in Kansas, we actually have two frequencies that we have set up for our burn associations. If you get an association going, one of the first things that we do is get radios and we get those frequencies on there. The reason we have the dedicated frequencies is so that burn associations can assist each other. We have a lot of groups that work together, particularly if they get into these bigger burns. You need more personnel and you need more equipment, more help. That way they can communicate without any problems. The reason for the two frequencies is if you get into complex burns and you get to communicating back and forth on a particular line, you can split your teams up and each one has a frequency, and that way you're not tromping on each other's communications. Okay, we're up to cell phones. I talked about that. Drinking water. Make sure that you have plenty of water and fluids on hand. Dehydration is one of the biggest problems that you have with personnel as we're working with fire, particularly during growing season burns. You just cannot hardly have too much water at that point in time. Fencing pliers, that's something you want in your toolbox and you hope you never have to use. If the fire does jump the fence, sometimes that's the only alternative you have is to cut that fence, and you certainly need the equipment to do that. Road signs, again, this is where burn associations come in. This is some of the equipment that they will have that normal farmer doesn't have. I don't know any farmer or farmer or rancher that has a road sign that says prescribed fire, do not report, or smoke ahead, do not travel in, that type of thing. So those guys will have those signs on hand. I have a stop sign. Again, if we have to block off a highway, we can do that. NOAA radios, we normally don't have those on hand, but a lot of people have an app on their phone that they can use for weather conditions as well. And then you can list the other things that you need as far as auxiliary water, that type of thing that you might have in your particular situation. I'd certainly keep a list of the crew members that showed up to help me with my fire. And again, this is part of that legal aspect. You want to be able to identify those people that can support that you did all your due diligence and carried things out according to the plan. And here's your go, no-go list. Excuse me, I missed the ignition part of this. What you want to do is to write up a narrative, if you will, on how you're going to carry this burn out. And again, it kind of goes back to the map. Once you develop that map, you can just follow yourself around that map and just write down what you're going to do. We're going to start at point 4 on our map, and we're going to start at that bridge, and we're going to go both ways with 2 teams. We're going to hold up at the corners. I think it was 3 and C, if I remember right. And we're going to wait for that fire to develop our black area, at least 100 feet wide. I would write all that stuff down and put it in a narrative form, and then I would attach it to my burn plan. The go, no-go list, again, on the backfires, this would be the responsibility of the fire boss, but the day of the burn, I would traverse that burn. I'd go around all the way around that burn to make sure those fire breaks have not been compromised. And like in our case where we had that little rough area up there by the residents. You know, you may not, if you're not familiar with the actual property and you're the fire boss, you may not know that they had a 3-inch rain there a week ago, and all the preparation work that you did to smooth that out has now washed away, and you can't get your trucks across there. You don't want to be coming around there and find out you can't get across there. So you want to be sure and traverse that fire breaks to make sure they're secure. We used to have a real good photo of a fire break that was probably 40 feet wide on the particular property. The producer had went in and cut all the cedar trees and just basically dropped them on the ground, didn't stack them. They laid out there and he put in his fire break and before they lit the fire, they had a pretty good sized wind come in, and I don't know if you know cedar trees, when they're cut off like that, they roll just as well as tumbleweeds roll. And it blew a whole bunch of those cedar trees down into his fire break, and it compromised his fire break. So you surely want to check that before you get too far down the line. Again, contact your neighbors, and you cannot contact them too early. Let them know that you're planning on burning. Be sure and contact the fire department. Again, that's part of that no-go. They'll give you the green light to go, and if they don't, then you can't. Weather conditions, make sure those fit within the parameters of your burn plan. Now, this is one of the things that, that you're going to stew over quite a little bit. You can make pen and ink changes to your burn plan. You write your burn plan up with a north wind, as in our little case here we did, but the only winds you've been getting for a long time are out of the northwest. It's okay to write in there, we're using the northwest winds. Now you have to make little pen and ink changes as to where you're going to go and start and that type of thing, but it's okay to make some pen and ink changes. If you make major changes in your burn plan, say you're going from a spring burn to a summer burn, then you need to go back and rewrite your plan and get it reapproved from NRCS. So, okay, equipment, make sure your equipment's ready. And we talked quite a little bit about that, but I would certainly make sure all my pumps were started before I started my fire. Make sure, I've never met a Briggs & Stratton engine that I didn't think was going to fail at some point in time. And as David pointed out, it's Murphy's Law. You know, she may run 1 minute, you shut it off and you can't get it started the next. So keep that in mind. Adequate crew, again, make sure you have all the equipment and all the crew members there to operate it. Make sure you've done your due diligence as far as notifying folks downwind, down the water airshed. And then you'll have a briefing session to go over, and that's where the map comes in. Generally what we do is we print everybody off a copy of the map and we hand it to them. They have it in their pocket as we conduct the burn. But we do have a briefing session and we go over that map to make sure that they understand what's going to take place and how the property lies. Be sure and identify any hazards. Again, keep your people out of the smoke when it's around the power lines. You may have some wet areas, again, that cause issues as well. Make sure you have a plan to handle your escapes. Generally, I like to have at least one truck unit standing by as a backup, if you will. Not only if we have an escape, but also, again, if one breaks down, you got somebody you can slip in there to back them up. And so it's always good to have a plan to handle emergencies. And then the last thing you do, of course, is sign it and go on. Here are some other templates that you can certainly access online. The one that you have in hand is that OSU one. Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, they also have a pretty decent template. Burn associations in Texas have one. Extension has a burn template as well. NRCS has a template. And again, if you're in the programs, you can certainly use theirs. The reason we didn't use NRCS's template today is because there are a couple pages in there that are specific to the agency, and I won't say they're irrelevant, but if you're doing your own burn plan, they're kind of irrelevant. So don't necessarily have to use that one. Some of the local burn associations that I work with actually have their own template that they like to use. So there's other ones out there that are certainly available. Again, as David pointed out, the prominent theme of doing prescribed burn is safety, safety, safety. And again, we're looking at people first, property second. So keep that in mind as you work through it. Far as losses in terms of escapes, about 3/4 of all escapes are the result of not following your prescription. And again, you know, if you write it down, it's a little tougher to ignore than if you just have it in your head. So a written burn plan is a real good idea to keep you on track. And all that. Lack of communications is also a major factor, and again, that's why I like those two-way radios. You can communicate during the fire, but also you need to have a real good briefing session ahead of time so everybody knows what their job is, where they're going to be, and how they're going to respond to different situations. And when things happen, you can change your burn plan. As I pointed out, you can make some pen and ink changes, but make sure all the crew members know that there's been a change. And we see this, particularly this year, we've seen a lot of, again, I don't know what kind of weather cycle we're in. Normally, you know, 2 or 3 years ago, I would really put a lot of stock into the weather service. They were on target. They hit wind direction, they hit humidity, they were really good. This year, it's been all over the board. We've had winds that come out of the northwest, and by the time we're done, they're out of the east. You know, it's just been all over the board, so.
How do you prep for that? Because that's frustrating. You know, people want to help us and they want to come Tuesday, and it's like the weather conditions aren't right, so we're weather conditions. Do it then, but it's hard when you can't predict.
Yeah, and again, and you mentioned it, how do you prep for that? A lot of times, because of circumstances, when you do preparation work, you lock yourself into a particular wind direction. You know, whether it's placement of brush piles or that type of thing, you do lock yourself in sometimes, and there's not much you can do about it. I mean, if you can't get the right wind, then you're done. That's all there is to it. You don't execute. So, okay, do you have any questions? This particular photo here, this is a burn we did back in 2015. If you go on the internet, you can actually pull up a video of this. It's kind of a neat, it's about a 5-minute video. The whole burn wasn't done in 5 minutes, but it gives you the last part of it. This is, again, a circle burn, if you will, down in Barber County, about 285 acres, and it talks about, it kind of illustrates, if you will, the weather issues that David talked about punching through that atmosphere. You can see how the heat column is punched up and it's starting to pull in that wind from all sides. Fires do create their own weather, if you will. They'll pull the wind in or pull the air in from the sides and actually change wind direction on the interior of that thing and punch it up. So.